Welcome inside the NHL BR Insider Notebook. I'm Frank Seravalli, and it is a Tuesday, November 18th edition of the NHL Insider Notebook here. And we're streaming live on the Bleacher Report app as well as YouTube. Join us. Let's make this an interactive show. Give me your questions, comments, concerns, fears, trade proposals, whatever it is you got. Let's talk puck. Let's have some fun here over the next 30 minutes or so. We've got a lot to tackle because it's been a particularly busy last week on the NHL, particularly injury front. And certainly we're going to start with the New Jersey Devils, where it's been less than pretty and probably a pretty gory situation at dinner last week in Chicago when Jack Hughes sustained a cut that will keep him out of the lineup for the next 8 weeks after undergoing surgery. And the amazing part of this story is that, at least from an initial timeline perspective, that Jack Hughes appears to have gotten lucky, that the initial fears that surrounded this injury were that Jack Hughes might miss even more time, and yet he's expected to miss 8 weeks, according to the New Jersey Devils, for surgery on his finger. The procedure was performed at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City, and he will be reevaluated at the 6-week mark. Why is the 6-week mark important? Because that's just around New Year's Eve, which is the exact day that rosters are due to be submitted for the upcoming 2026 Olympics in Milan, Italy. Now, we don't expect this freak accident and injury to impact Jack Hughes' ability to make the U.S. roster for the Olympics, but that timeline will certainly be important to keep in mind because that doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room after the fact. Currently, he's scheduled to return to the lineup sometime in mid-January, which leaves about 2.5 weeks before NHL players are scheduled to go on pause for the Olympics. So, Team USA dealing with a whole lot of injuries. It's not just Jack Hughes, but it's also both Tkachuk brothers who are working their way back to the NHL lineup in Brady and Matthew. Brady receiving clearance to ramp up activity. Matthew Tkachuk getting closer to returning to skating for the Florida Panthers. You've got Jacob Slavin on the back end, just to name another one. His time has certainly been limited for the Carolina Hurricanes so far this season. So it's really been fits and starts for Team USA and their selection process as this NHL season has gone on. And really a gut punch, not just for Jack Hughes and his season, but for the New Jersey Devils as a whole. This is a guy who has struggled with availability and dependability over the last few seasons, missing 20 games in each of the last 2 years. But to have this be a non-hockey injury to take out one of the game's brightest young stars, I mean, it hurts. There's no way around it. And it also hurts the New Jersey Devils lineup. They had been cooking with gas offensively so far this season. And now all of a sudden you turn around, you take out Jack Hughes, you have a couple other injuries pile up, and all of a sudden you're going, ooh, our bottom 6 forward group gets thin in a hurry. Where the Devils going to find depth production, that's going to be a key question to figure out for New Jersey as they try and keep pace in the Metropolitan Division playoff race. Let's take a peek at our YouTube chat. Fire your questions, comments, concerns, trade proposals, whatever it is that you got. I'm here for it on this Tuesday, November 18th edition. Bobby Bowe in the YouTube chat says, when will Doug Armstrong start dealing? It's a great question because, well, the St. Louis Blues have been in a tough spot. They're obviously unhappy. Doug Armstrong let everyone know 10 days, 2 weeks ago that he was open for business. A lot of teams have wondered about the availability of their captain, Braden Shen. I'm sure teams have been calling about some of the other expensive pieces on their roster, including Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas. My understanding is that there's a very small list of non-negotiables, of protected players, so to speak, in St. Louis. I believe that list includes Jake Neighbors. I believe it includes Dylan Holloway. I believe it probably includes Robert Thomas, although that's not an absolute stone cold guarantee. Maybe Colton Parayko, but outside of that, I think all bets are off on the St. Louis Blues roster and what could happen moving forward. That's just the spot that they're in, as they have fallen well short of expectations for a team that took the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets to the mat last year in the playoffs to the end before falling short in that series. Andrew Williams throws in here, any chance the Wings look to boost their scoring depth? Been very top heavy so far. Andrew, I think that's been a story for a lot of teams so far. And we'll talk about the Edmonton Oilers in a minute and how over-reliant yet again they've been on Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But really liking what I'm seeing from the Wings so far. They seem to be on track to break that playoff drought. Their best players have been their dogs. You're right. Those guys have been dragging them into the fight every night. I like the progress that we've seen from this team defensively, particularly from some of their young players that have made this a real meritocracy in Detroit. They're earning their ice time under Todd McClellan, and the vets are going by the wayside based on how well they've been outplayed. That's an exciting thing. Finding some of that depth scoring, that's going to be the challenge because so many teams are looking for that this time, between now and heading into March's trade deadline. They're in a spot where a lot of teams seem to be top heavy. You've got your producers that are putting up points, and then where's the rest of it coming from? We just had this conversation about the New Jersey Devils. I could see them being in the market for that, as well as one of those second pair defensemen that everyone seems to be after when it comes to the trade deadline. Just find a way to beef up that team just a tad defensively. But pro scouting on the defensive side has not been Detroit's strong suit over the last few years. Peeking at our BR app, Rooster wants to know, anyone to Buffalo? More like the question is, anyone out of Buffalo? As the Sabres, they throttled the Edmonton Oilers on Monday night, but at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings, again, tied with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Everyone's waiting for that next shoe to drop. Kevyn Adams, we're in year 6 of the Kevyn Adams experience with him running this team. He's got an important new sidekick in Jarmo Kekalainen. And Lindy Ruff appears to be walking the plank in terms of his final year as an NHL head coach. What next? Coaching change? General manager change? Who is making the decisions moving forward for the Buffalo Sabres on what the future of this team is? Who's calling those shots? Does Kevyn Adams have full autonomy to make the moves required to get this trending in a better direction? I think that's a really significant and important question to ask. If I were looking from the outside in, I'd say, I'm not sure that that's the case, but we haven't been given any indication otherwise because it has been more of the same old in Buffalo, where they were hoping to find a way to turn the corner, and they've gotten actually pretty productive, decent seasons out of Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch, etc. And excited to see Rasmus Dahlin get back in the lineup as well. Rinkrat says, as a Hawks fan, they have blown away all my expectations. Do they look for a top-line winger? Any rumblings from Chicago? I don't think they're at that point. I mean, I think if one of those types of players became available, Rinkrat, that they'd be willing to engage in that type of conversation to support the top 6. But I think the most exciting part about the Hawks, as they've played some really good hockey of late, is that they're only half-baked. I explained this last week. They've got about half of their lineup where they want it to be in terms of the future players ready to make an impact. And when you think about Frondell and all these guys, Roman Kanserov, and go through the list, it's been incredible to see some of these players make strides elsewhere in college hockey. Marek Vanacker and playing in the OHL. I mean, the list is endless in terms of what Chicago has in their pipeline, that I think what they want to do before closing off some of that opportunity and going out to get a more defined top 6 winger is how much of what we have in our pipeline could already be here, meaning don't go crazy on acquisition cost. We might already have that piece. They want to make sure that there's some room to grow and opportunity there. So I don't see them chasing for some sort of short-term fix to think that that's going to get them over the top. I think their build under Kyle Davidson has been very methodical. It's been patient when a lot of times, frankly, people on the outside haven't seen what they're putting together. And so exciting times ahead for the Blackhawks, who you mentioned have exceeded expectation. The interesting part about that is that now what? Can this team actually complete what they've started and get to the playoffs this year ahead of schedule? I mean, I wouldn't put it past them the way that they've played this last handful of games. They've certainly been up to the task. Let's take a little peek at the RFA watch. And it's interesting with that Adrian Kempe extension too earlier in the week. On Monday, the Kings announcing that $85 million deal over 8 years. It certainly hurts the UFA class. But when it comes to the potential signings that we could see moving forward, look, there's been some massive ones so far this season, and Thomas Harley now out week to week for the Dallas Stars. One of the big questions was how would he live up to such a big deal signed on his end, $85 million, a massive contract for Thomas Harley. Obviously, the injury comes at an inopportune time, but the production had sort of waned a little bit. And why did that wane? Because the guy that ran the power play for the Dallas Stars the last half of last season, well, Miro Heiskanen's back, and he's not getting some of that same opportunity. So when you look forward to some of the RFA class, and Jason Robertson, speaking of the Dallas Stars, will be a big part of that, the Stars are going to have to figure out what to do on that front, because Jason Robertson and the way that he's played so far this season with that vaunted Dallas Stars power play is due for a significant raise. We're talking probably in the ballpark of $11.5 million a year. And it's going to have to be for some term, given that he hasn't piled up a ton of career earnings to this point. So keep an eye on the Dallas Stars and Jason Robertson, a guy that they weren't sure whether they were keeping, signing, what was happening last spring. Man, I bet they're feeling really good about putting those talks to the side and making a coaching change. Connor Bedard, nothing new on that front in terms of RFA talks, although he's been phenomenal this season. Simon Edvinsson is going to be another interesting name to watch. And Leo Carlsson, we're all watching and enjoying the explosion that he's had this season for the Anaheim Ducks. He is a guy that's in the final year of his deal. He's already up to 26 points in 19 games, and you would think that the Anaheim Ducks would want to get that signed sooner rather than later, just to get ahead of what's already trending toward being a pretty expensive ticket. So yeah, that's another one to watch on the RFA front. When it comes to the Edmonton Oilers, what a disappointing season it has been. If you're looking at the quarter mark and handing out some report cards, I'm giving the Edmonton Oilers a D, and the only thing that's saving them from a failing grade is the fact that they've somehow been able to milk out points in games that they don't have any business winning. Like against the Philadelphia Flyers or Columbus Blue Jackets last week, it's pumped up their numbers and made their spot in the standings seem like they're on a better trajectory than many would have envisioned at this point in time. Look, it's been a disaster on so many different fronts. And we talked very early on in today's show about the idea of the over-reliance that the Oilers forwards have had on Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Believe it or not, if you look back over the last 10 years, the Oilers have gotten fewer points and production out of their bottom half of their lineup this year than any other year in the McDavid and Draisaitl experience, which is kind of hard to believe. When you talk about a net goal share so far this season with the Oilers, McDavid and Draisaitl on the ice versus off of it, they've been outscored 30-9 so far this season with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl off the ice. That is crazy. So where do the Oilers go from here? Well, David Tomashik hasn't worked. Isaac Howard is back in Bakersfield. Matt Savoy is trending in the right direction. He looks like a guy who's coming on, is going to be a player for this team. The Oilers need not just help defending, not just in net where their goaltending has been poor, but they also need some more talent on their forward group. That is definitely evident so far. And man, this depth has eroded in a very short order for Edmonton. So keep an eye on what Edmonton does next, because, I think the seat has gotten a little warmer under Chris Knoblauch as this road trip has gone on. They're not seeing the returns. And Jay Woodcroft was fired under pretty similar circumstances, even though Chris Knoblauch has taken this team to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. The seat's getting warmer, but beyond that, at some point they're going to have to do something, because missing the playoffs this year, and they're kind of, believe it or not, teetering closer to that edge as we've had to readjust some expectations for Edmonton. It's been ugly. How do they find their way out of it? How do they find more skill? Stan Bowman has his work cut out for him. He's tried to find solutions. David Tomaszek's the Swedish leading scorer last season. He's barely played. And so trying to find diamonds in the rough, that hasn't been it either. They're going to have to make some tough decisions as the Edmonton Oilers are tied with the Calgary Flames, believe it or not, for regulation wins so far this season. They both have just 4, and Calgary has played 1 fewer game so far this season, and Calgary is at the bottom of the West standings alongside St. Louis. We touched briefly on the Adrian Kempe extension, a big piece of business done for the Los Angeles Kings. 8 years times $10.625 million for a very round number of $85 million, and this fits. It fits when you consider the contract that was signed, the sort of goalposts that have put in place in the marketplace so far this season, the Marty Necas deal, and what he's been able to produce and the level that he's been at since not just arriving in Colorado, but the work that he'd done at this point in his career in Carolina. You throw that up at his number where he's at, and then you look at the production that we've seen from Adrian Kempe, who's also a bit older, and you see how that $10.625 million they arrive at sort of fair, makes both sides wince a little bit in terms of the term. The Kings now have Kempe through his age 38 season. And when it comes to the overall total dollars in AAV, I'm sure the Kempe camp, who was originally looking for something in the neighborhood of $12 million a year, they had to readjust expectations down, even though Kempe is tracking toward his first career point per game season over a full 82 game stretch. You know, it takes a little bit of give and take on both sides. So the Kings and Kempe landing in a very fair spot. The second largest contract in franchise history, only to the deal that Drew Doughty is currently playing on. Back in the BR app, we've got Rizzy who says, Caps, any options at center without Pierre-Luc Dubois? Get in line. You can get in line behind the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Vancouver Canucks. How many teams around the league are looking for a center? The Montreal Canadiens are included in that group, particularly with the issues that they've had with their injuries down the middle. Alex Newhook out for 4 months. Kirby Dach out 4 to 6 weeks. Caden Gooley on defense out 8 to 10. It has been a mash unit in Montreal, and they're just trying to hang on for dear life here as they build off of a great start to the season. Hit the skids a little bit here in the last 10 days, but those injuries are certainly not going to help. The Caps are in a long list of teams that could use a center. And look, this season, perhaps unsurprisingly for the Caps, they've come back to earth a little bit. All those career years, they've still defended well. They've been really stingy. Their attention to detail has been great, but they haven't scored at anywhere near the clip that they did last season, which, again, probably to be expected given on how many guys had career years. It's hard to replicate that year after year and find another gear. So add the Caps to that list of teams that would be in the market for a center. The double doink, I already talked about Connor Bedard, and there's no rumor about him. He's cruising along, wants to be in Chicago. Chicago wants to have him. They'll find the right number, and there's no real reason to hash it out at this exact moment in time. He's playing just fine, and the contract will take care of itself. The marketplace, as we mentioned, is pretty mature at this point in terms of some financial goalposts on what that deal looks like. Chillin asks, who are the more active teams when it comes to buyers you see or think in the future? Well, in terms of teams that are active right now today, that part is relatively clear. So running through those teams that are in the market right now, the Montreal Canadiens, the Carolina Hurricanes, and they're also thinking big picture. You've got the Toronto Maple Leafs, who we touched on. You've got the Utah Mammoth are certainly in the mix. The Minnesota Wild are not averse to doing something if they can find the right deal, although they've played better of late, 6-2-2 in their last 10. We talked about the Blues. The Preds are willing to shake it up alongside the Calgary Flames. I don't know where the Preds go from here, but the Flames are not really in any rush. They've got some great pieces in Kadri, Rasmus Anderson, and as well potentially Blake Coleman. But what's the need to do that in November, given how thin we just talked about the trade market? Maybe 6, 7, 8 teams kind of want to maybe do something right now. Why not hang on until March? You're dealing with injury risk, of course, but could you get a better deal? Could you get a better return between now and March if you're only dealing with a deck that's a third full? And given the number of teams that may be in the playoff chase this year, that is definitely going to be something to consider. Let's see what else we got here in our YouTube chat. Anthony says Calgary's going down tonight. James Gordon says, how much was Paul Coffey holding the Oilers together? I think that's one of the things that hasn't been talked about enough is the coaching staff changes that occurred in Edmonton. It's on both ends of this, right? It's Glenn Gulutzan on the forward side. He leaves to go become the head coach of the Dallas Stars. And on the back end, they lose Paul Coffey, who is still an advisor to the team, but no longer in an assistant coach role. I think he had, butted heads at various points in time with some other members of the coaching staff because of the hard edge that he has. But it's also part of what made this Oiler defense a lot more formidable. He kept everyone on their toes because he's someone that has that intensity to him. I think it's been way too laissez-faire for the Oilers so far to start this season. Their attention to detail, their effort, their consistency, all those things. Not a perfect situation with Paul Coffey, I don't think, but you can't argue with the results because the Oilers defended much, much better previously under his control. And now moving forward, go back to July when, these coaching, late June, early July, when these coaching changes were put in place, probably bigger at the time than any sort of off-season move that the Oilers could have made. I don't know that that's been talked about enough with the Oilers start to this season. So good question, James. Jay Sweeney 9927. Are the Caps going to address their holes on offense? Feel like their center depth is thin. We just talked about that a little bit with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Bobby Bowe says, think anyone will take a shot at bringing Mitchell Miller back. Mitchell Miller has been lighting it up in the KHL. I'm going to say not in the short term, but potentially maybe if his play warrants that he's a for sure, can't miss, will definitely help your team NHLer. Anthony W. says, what about Nick Schmaltz as a pending UFA? He is doing well. He is doing really well, and he's definitely earned a pretty significant raise. The consistency for me has been one of the big things that stood out about Nick Schmaltz and his season with the Utah Mammoth. He's just on a night-to-night basis. We're not seeing some of the lapses or gaps in his game. He's found a way to raise his B game level. You hear coaches talk about all the time, and that's been a big feather in his cap. He's been hugely helpful to the Utah Mammoth, and like I mentioned before, I like where Utah's heading. They've hit a little bit of a skid in the sense that they faced a little bit of adversity for the first time this season. We'll see how they respond to that, and we'll see how the Utah Mammoth go about trying to extend Nick Schmaltz and to keep him part of this team. So we talked about Adrian Kempe. We talked about the RFA class and some developments or non-developments on that front. But can we just say a prayer, a little RIP for the free agent class of 2026? Because, man, you just think about what could have been. You think about all the players that have signed so far this season, really since training camp. Kirill Kaprizov, the $136 million man. Marty Necas, Jack Eichel, Connor McDavid at a paltry $25 million over 2 years. And then add in Adrian Kempe and Kyle Connor. And you go thinking about a true free agent frenzy and how it could have been, what could have been one of the juiciest, most intriguing free agent classes of all time. And it's gone by the wayside. We're going to be picking, with all due respect to Nick Schmaltz, if he ends up making it to market, we're going to be picking at the carcass of what could have been one of the all-time classes. And that's okay. Also probably to be expected because a lot of people got way over their skis thinking about some of these pieces that could be on the move on the market. We're kind of left with Artemi Panarin, Nick Schmaltz, and maybe a few other guys, which don't hold a candle to some of the names that I just mentioned. But maybe that's the story of the salary cap era. And particularly the last 5 years. If you have high-end talent, you have to find a way to hang on to it because it is so incredibly hard to come by. Think about all the things that we just mentioned regarding transactions, thin markets, number of teams searching for impact pieces. They don't grow on trees. And when you see some of them move around like we did Mitch Marner going from Toronto to Vegas last summer, it just shows you how rare it is to truly get your hands on a game changer. And one of those players, when one of those players pops up and becomes available, you've got to do everything you can to get your hands on them. And so that's why we could see a relatively interesting trade market between now and then, because those guys are certainly not making it to the free agent market. Let's wrap up today before you throw your final questions, comments, concerns, fears, and trade proposals into the chat. Talking about the New York Rangers and their home record. Will the real New York Rangers please stand up? I understand the frustration from Ranger fans, one of the best teams in the league on the road. They put it together a little bit at the Garden, taking care of business against some woeful opponents and putting some goals on the board, and then go to Tampa and also put up 7. It's been a frustrating start to this season. But again, I'm going to mention, because there's been a few people asking questions about the New York Rangers, I'm still very bullish on New York and where they're heading from here. They are defending so much better this year than they have in the past. At some point, the goals will normalize. At some point, some of the higher end talent that the Rangers have, which given our conversation today, indicates that it's so much better than what other teams have at their disposal at times, that they're going to find a way to put it together and go on a bit of a run to normalize what's been a very odd start to the Rangers season at Madison Square Garden. I can't put my finger on it. Mike Sullivan and his staff can't put their finger on it. Ranger fans surely can't figure out what the heck's happening. This is an oddity, an aberration, a weird thing. And you would think that over the course of a 41-game home slate this season, that they will find a way to rip off a handful of games in a row and get back on track. That's certainly the hope in New York. Dylan Max says, how good's that Pasta contract looking right now? It was looking good from the start. I mean, honestly, Pasta and Geeky so far this season, that Bruins power play has been very impressive for a list of guys that you would not expect would jump off the page. Do I see Philip Forsberg on the move from Nashville? Look, I think if you're looking at the list of Nashville Predators that could potentially be on the move, Forsberg would definitely have a ton of value, but I would think that they'd try and find other solutions first with some of the older, longer-term deals that they have on their roster and cap table right now. So I would say Forsberg would be a lowercase, interesting, intriguing option, but not necessarily as a primary option if you're Barry Trotz and looking to shake things up for the Preds, which absolutely need a shakeup. Last peek at our YouTube chat here, and James Gordon says, as a Flames fan, I am salivating over the draft. Will the Flames actually pick first overall for the first time in franchise history? A great year to get number 1 if that happens. A great year to be in the mix, James, is what I would say. I've talked about Keaton Verhoff and his impact as the trending number 2 overall pick, potentially could outmuscle Gavin McKenna at number 1 overall because the door has been opened with it. I'd say a good run at Penn State, but certainly not stellar, less than stellar so far to start. That you're looking at 5 potential franchise-changing players. Ivor Stenberg, sign me up. Some of these other guys, Belchetz, I'm loving what I'm seeing from this 2026 draft class, and it's a great time to be a Flames fan and bottom out if they can potentially do that and convince themselves. And maybe that highlights one of those things that we were just talking about. Maybe instead of waiting to juice your return for the trade deadline for Rasmus Andersson or Nazem Kadri, you get out in front of it now and just pluck a couple of those vets off your roster to make finishing at the bottom of the standings a fait accompli, as opposed to a team that's trying to dig their way back into it and put a few more wins on the board. I know that's not been their mission and mandate, but maybe for the betterment overall of the franchise, that's what makes the most sense. Thanks to everyone who joined us in the chat. It was ripping today on YouTube as well as the BR app. It was fun to hang with you guys on a Tuesday, November 18th edition of the BR NHL Insider Notebook. We'll be back right here, 1:30 p.m. Eastern next Tuesday for a pre-Thanksgiving edition of the BR NHL Insider Notebook. And until then, enjoy the games. and have a great day, everyone.